This week's episode was brought to you by Nate, Christine Neville, and Rick. Thank you, Nate, Christine Neville, and Rick. It's with the generous support of listeners just like you that our research team remains hypnotized in a semi-permanent state of intellectual clarity and a frenzied, almost manic hyperactivity, clacking furiously at the keyboard, which our team of psychics interpret using only the most archaic forms of magic, which we use as the script for this show. If you'd like to help us keep our writing team hypnotized or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your generous monthly donation of a mere $5 will not only earn you this extended episode, but all of our extended episodes, which even include ones you can't find anywhere else because they're from that one time I lost my mind publicly. But not only that, I'll send you our 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art, along with the secret keys to our Discord server, where it's that time of year to sit around sharing spooky stories while eating digital marshmallows, whatever those are. The veil's so thin, Halloween is always a great time for a tarot reading, so check out our $20 tier and above, and you can jump in a video call whenever we can find the time and do a quick 11 card reading about whatever you can dream of. In this week's episode, we continue our occult biography of the New Age's most beloved and often imitated prophet, Edgar Cayce. When we last left off, Cayce had turned his back on farming and went to seek a name for himself in the city, where he quickly became known as the Sunday school teacher and bookstore clerk with the encyclopedic memory. I mean, people thought it was pretty weird he could read a book just by holding it to his head. In the first half of the show, we discussed Edgar's rise to popularity, his first kiss, and the strange, even frightening bursts of high-strangeness that were known to occur around Edgar when his emotions ran high. By the end of the free show, we discuss how Edgar came to discover his profound psychic abilities during hypnotism, and how they learned to direct these abilities towards the healing of the human body. In the extended show, we learn how Edgar's trance readings were used to diagnose others, how they stood up to the intense scrutiny of investigators, and the mind-boggling limits of such power, which included telepathy, mind control, levitation, precognition, and strangest of all, a somewhat alien personality. Each one we consider from an occult perspective. We even talked about that one time Edgar Cayce met Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Let's not forget that one time he shed blood for science. Anyway, thank you and enjoy the show. So the doctor says, "Nurse, how's that little girl who swallowed 10 quarters last night?" Nurse replies, "Sorry, sir, no change yet."
I like that one.
Oh, boy.
Oh, that's a good one.
My mom was a nurse growing up, so I'd often play hide and seek in the hospital, but they'd always find me in the ICU.
Ah,
Oh, wow.
that's a good one too.
Once as a kid, I went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, I get heartburn every time I eat birthday cake." You know what he said to me?
What?
"Next time, take the candles off first."
That's hitting me personal right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we not only tackle the occult symbolism of the New Age as it's native to the moneyed occultnik hipsters from the turn of the century who wrote poetry about bodily fluids. Nay, we continue our multi-part series, diving into the life and times of the occult secrets of the famous psychic medium and trance healer, the sleeping prophet himself, Mr. Edgar Cayce. You're now joining us for part 2 of the series. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by our co-hosts, the dapper doggy dilettante, Marisama.
Charmed, I'm sure.
The servitor of the central sun, Malachor 5.
Malachor, use solar beam.
And the long leg of justice, Heka Astra.
Hello.
Welcome back, everybody. I only wanted to cover the interesting parts of Edgar Cayce's life, but the more I learn, the bigger and weirder his story becomes. So it's getting longer and longer. I think he just might be the Forrest Gump of the occult world.
They should make a movie about it.
He really comes off almost like a Luke Skywalker character.
Mostly because he's also pure and kind of naive at some points.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, I'm just a country boy who's got this amazing magical skill."
Please don't use me to your advantage and leave me penniless.
But
Leslie, I want to go to Toshi Station to pick up some power converters. So where we last left off Edgar Cayce, it was the 1890s in Christian County, Kentucky, and the strange little boy had fallen head over heels in love with the Bible, which so far was doing a lot more for him than falling in love with his little middle school girl crush that had rejected him outright for being the village weirdo. Rather than return to class embarrassed, head low in shame, Edgar decided to stop attending school altogether and got a job working at the city bookstore. Between teaching a popular Sunday school class and working at the town's bookstore, where he made a memorable impression on nearly everybody who came in, Edgar had begun to feel like the world was opening up to him. It was around this time Edgar received his first invitation to a party. Well, maybe it wasn't his first party, but it was his first invitation to a party that wasn't a family dinner or a church fundraiser, you know, where single women would be present, that kind of thing. The invitation was for a moonlight, as they called it, up on the hill, a property that belonged to the Salter family, and it had quite the reputation. To your average citizen of Hopkinsville, the hill was a vibrant, liberal stronghold just outside of town. Under its original owner, Samuel Salter, the town's most prolific architect, the hill had become a hub of intellectual activity. There was even some land and buildings for farming, as Mr. Salter liked to experiment with crops and grow his own medicine. So, pretty intelligent, inventive guy. Samuel also had a powerful love of the arts and history. He boasted an enormous private library and was known to host musicians, politicians, and any other great thinkers who happened to make their way through Hopkinsville. By the time Edgar was invited to attend, Samuel's daughters, all of whom were college educated, had inherited the legacy of the property and kept the same open-door policy for which the hill was now famous. Edgar had received the invitation for the moonlight from Ethel Duke, a local elementary school teacher. Edgar was elated, but he was a bit apprehensive. The hill was, you know, for fancy people, and Edgar by comparison said he felt uncouth and uneducated. He only had like an 8th grade education after all. Edgar still wanted to go, and he would have if Leslie had not forbade him. After all, the Salters were known for having Jewish, Black, and even Hindu dinner guests, and Lord knows they probably sat around talking about women voting or even, God forbid, holding public office. Leslie would have none of it.
Son, I forbid you to talking for them damn stupid liberals.
So instead of attending, Edgar spent the next few weeks picking his boss's wife's brain about the Salters. Edgar learned all the gossip he could, so when Miss Ethel Duke, the same elementary school teacher, came by with another invitation, he would be sure to attend. He would say nothing to his father. When she eventually did come by, she brought her best friend and cousin with her, 15-year-old Gertrude Evans, the daughter of Elizabeth, the oldest of the Salter sisters.
I want you to meet my cousin, Gertrude.
Leading Cayce out to the buggy on Main Street where she was waiting. As Edgar would later describe, Gertrude was
a mere slip of a girl.
With brunette hair, big anime waifu eyes, about 5'3" with pale skin and oval face and weighing all of 80 pounds. No doubt, as Gertrude intended, Cayce quickly developed a schoolboy crush. On Friday evening, Cayce shined his shoes and made himself as dapper as absolutely possible before walking an hour to the hill. On his way up to the property, he saw paper lanterns hung from maple trees, and guests were outside sipping lemonade and eating cookies and little sandwiches. Cayce had never been so impressed. Inside were expensive carpets, tapestries, thick brocade upholstery, Chinese porcelain, colored glass lamps, musical instruments, and an entire library of books. It was also colorful and stimulating. Carrie, the youngest of the Salter matriarchs, was surrounded by adoring would-be suitors. She's probably fanning herself. That night, Edgar met Elizabeth, Gertrude's mother, and he was keen to learn that she was the one who tended to the beautiful vegetable garden, kept the house full of flowers, and well-stocked with important dinner guests. Edgar hardly knew anyone and had little to say unless the conversation turned to the Bible. Eventually, however, he found himself face-to-face with Gertrude, who took his hands and led him out into the gardens for moon-gazing and private conversation. From the sounds of things, this had been the first girl he had bothered to talk to privately since his childhood disaster with Bessie Kenner, and despite being derpy and nervous, the two hit it off famously. Gertrude loved books after all. Cayce could hardly take his eyes off her, and he got the distinct impression that she somehow knew more about him than he knew about her.
Had his weird reputation preceded him?
Smitten as he was, Edgar was surprised to discover that the invitations continued. Gertrude, or at least one of her friends, made sure to invite Edgar to every single one of these little gatherings, and the two were seen together constantly.
So cute.
It is kind of cute. They're about the same age. I think he's 3 years older than her.
It's kind of funny because I'd imagine it's like around this point in a male's life, right, who's raised in a Buddhist monastery. They'd force him to separate from the females for his own good. And then Edward Cayce, you know, he's like, hey, I'm just going to try, and look at his career, you know, and he's kind of like badass later in life. It ultimately does have its cost one way or another, but it's just funny to compare the two. You know, some Buddhist monk might tell you to just go up to the monastery and sweep and make sure we have interesting dinner guest. Don't talk to girls.
Well, it's strangely thelemic because she really is his other pair, and I don't know if he would have survived a psychic career if not for her.
Yeah, she was his grounding person because she kept him attached to reality and like what is really important in the now moment. And it caused him to kind of shun fame and being misused by other people. I love that here in this scene as well that I noticed she took the initiative and walked forward with him into the gardens to talk to him. So she initiated the relationship and they're very reciprocal to each other, which I think is a very cute and beautiful thing.
Edgar Cayce likes women. He just has no idea what to do with them.
But she knew what to do. And
Yes.
she's good at leading him in a gentle and I think elegant way. She's not bossy or overzealous about it, but she's very gently leads him into the relationship, which is, I think, very thelemic.
And she is the more educated.
Yeah, for sure. She's college educated, which is way beyond his, schooling.
And she must have really seen something in Edgar because despite their ongoing courtship, the elders of the Salter family, although they were welcoming to Edgar, they were convinced he wasn't the ideal, husband material. The younger members of the house genuinely accepted him, and this was even after they learned about his weird ability to memorize books by shoving them against his forehead. In fact, Ethel, Gertrude's bestie, was Edgar's biggest fan, but all the Salter sisters were captivated by his childhood stories. When Hugh and Lynn, husbands of sisters, discovered Edgar's gifts, they had him demonstrate them by reading an entire deck of cards without turning them over. According to legend, Edgar got every single one of them correct. Just off the top of my head, I'm fairly certain 25% accuracy for reading a deck of cards upside down, it's like statistically impossible. It's considered profoundly psychic. And then we learned, according to Ingo Swann, one of the CIA's best remote viewers, he was only brought into the super duper above top secret programs only after his accuracy reached 50%.
Right. It's he had military grade psychic powers.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like better than that even. He had like super saiyan. I don't watch the show, so I don't know. It's over 9,000.
What, 9,000?
Exactly.
So, while most of the Salters thought it endlessly amusing that Edgar could locate missing objects, all he'd have to do was think about the object before going to sleep. Then he'd wake up and know exactly where it was. He would sometimes find Gertrude gazing at him during these times as if he were, quote,
A strange fish that ought to be thrown back.
When asked about Casey's miraculous abilities, she replied bluntly.
I don't like it.
But the two seemed to get along better when Edgar admitted he really didn't either. Well, it was mostly just entertaining. There were two instances which caused quite a stir. The first was during a Sunday evening when Edgar was dozing off in one of the armchairs in the parlor. According to Gertrude, she just suggested Edgar should, get some sleep, which apparently he did, and he remained on the spot until the next day, when, after numerous unsuccessful attempts, she ordered him to awaken. Immediately, Edgar awoke, and he began to stretch like nothing had happened. The second incident, it hadn't even happened on the hill, but apparently, the gossip had spread quickly. Edgar had been out with a friend, seeing one of Sam Jones's revival meetings at the old tabernacle. The two walked back to the 7th Street house together, intending to crash in Casey's bedroom. But when they arrived, Edgar was surprised to find the entire Cayce family had decided to visit and stay the night, leaving his bedroom totally unavailable. Cayce was pissed. It was his room after all, and somebody was paying the lion's share of the rent, and so he had a right to be upset. Well, Leslie and Edgar were yelling at each other. The would-be visitor friend slipped out unnoticed, and Edgar, still in his clothes, flopped on the living room couch and went to sleep. It was not long after this, when all the lights were out, the house had grown quiet. The couch Edgar was sleeping on suddenly burst into flame. Apparently, the smoke and fire woke Edgar up, who dashed outside, and once he was there, he began rolling in the snow to put out the burning clothes. Once his clothes were extinguished, Edgar ran back inside to grab the couch and hauled it outside before everything else caught fire. What makes this remarkable is that the couch hadn't been positioned near fire. It hadn't been positioned near anything hot. Nobody had been smoking, and there were no signs that the fire had come from the couch. In fact, it appeared that the fire had come from inside Edgar's clothes. Now, Cayce thought it was bizarre, but they pretty much all just forgot the incident as quickly as it had happened. The fire was out, nobody got hurt, and that was that. On the hill, however, the event caused considerable discussion. This would not be the first time strange or unexplainable things seemed to happen around Edgar. Typically, when he was upset, papers would fly off desks when otherwise no breeze would be present, and books sometimes even flew off shelves. According to one of our sources, the 7th Street fire was just one of 4 unexplainable fires attributed to Edgar's presence. So, they were worried about him burning stuff down. Do any of you have experiences with this kind of thing?
With fire?
I had a friend that I used to rave with, and anytime this dude got sufficiently upset, his phone would stop working. It would blow up. You couldn't have this guy around electronics when he was in a bad mood because they would legit break, including his car.
Sounds like he was a La Sombra vampire, because that's exactly what happens around them.
What, cars breaking?
Electronics break.
Oh, flickering lights
Malfunction.
and yeah.
I do have some electronic phenomenon happen around me. Certain street lights turn off when I walk near them.
I think some people have experienced stuff like this. They maybe just, don't have it filed in the right part of their brain,
That happens to me a lot with the street light, or they'll come back on when I walk under them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually one freeway exit to get onto Hollywood Boulevard. You do like this real big, like 360 turn, and that light will always turn off when we drive by, me and my buddies, or any car that I'm in, actually. Weird. I've already talked about how I get what I think are electronic attacks inside of my brain, and sometimes I might misconflate them with some of these phenomenon of electronics like shorting out and they're making weird noises. Like, I don't know if it's in my head or if it's my electronics.
Or it can
sometimes.
interact with your electromagnetic sphere of influence, I guess.
Yeah.
Your aura, as it would be also called.
I feel like computers don't like to work when you're on mushrooms.
Oh, no, you're not supposed to look at it when you're on that kind of thing.
Bad idea. I guess I just wanted to mention Edgar's case actually sounds quite a bit like many spontaneous human combustion cases that we've researched, where somebody usually goes to bed pissed off, or they lose consciousness, fall asleep when they're angry or sad, and then everything lights on fire. And it usually tends to come from inside their clothes, just like Edgar. So I find it interesting that Edgar's psychic ability makes him predisposed to spontaneous human combustion just because he's so damn psychic. Leslie and Carrie eventually figured out what was going on between Edgar and Gertrude. Leslie wasn't happy, but because Cayce was earning all the money, Dad was just gonna have to suck it up. Carrie never said anything, probably because she wasn't allowed to, but she always made sure Edgar looked the best before going to see Gertrude. The two had been dating for about 2 years. Edgar was making $15 a month, so he figured, heck, it's now or never. He decided to ask Gertrude to marry him.
Yay.
It was a cold day on the 7th of March, 1897, just days before Edgar's 20th birthday, when he confessed to Gertrude that he loved her and he wanted to spend the rest of his days with her. To his surprise, she didn't immediately turn him down, but replied,
It's true that I love you, but I will think about it. That's rough.
Edgar's memoirs make it sound like she didn't even say that. She was just like, yeah. Nonetheless, Edgar wanted to know when he could expect an answer. So Gertrude supposedly closed her eyes. She picked a random spot on the calendar. It was in 5 days. Edgar left to go anxiously await his answer. When the night came, Edgar arrived on horseback in the pouring rain. As the water streamed down, Gertrude told him that she had given the proposal much thought and she had decided to accept. Edgar was elated. Joy was still hanging in his eyes as the moment turned to awkward silence. Gertrude anxiously giving him a what now look, unsure what to do. Gertrude instructed Cayce that it would only be appropriate to kiss her, and she proceeded to show him how.
Aw, what a good girl.
By summer, Gertrude was wearing a fancy ring on her finger Cayce had set in Romania, and the two would have been married right away had Edgar not been laid off. Harry Hopper had taken on a new partner, and Edgar's services were no longer needed. Edgar must have known how bad this was, because he held off on telling Gertrude until he could nail down another gig. Cayce applied to many jobs unsuccessfully when, still on the hunt, he found himself following a large crowd of people into a department store. Eventually, somebody mistook him for an employee and asked Cayce to help her find some shoes. Cayce obliged, and, well, he made a sale. And then another, and another, and another. Isn't this a Mr. Bean skit? When the manager eventually noticed him, he said,
Cayce, is that your name? Run up to the bank and get me some change.
After Cayce returned, he continued to work throughout the day. And when asked why he had done what he had done, he simply replied, somebody asked me for something, and I gave it to him.
Perfect marketing.
Edgar held out at the department store for 1.5 years, but he didn't seem to take the same passion in his work that he did at the bookstore. It must have been an unflattering look, because Gertrude's Aunt Carrie would convince Edgar that he, ought to go look for a better job in a bigger city to, quote, expand his horizons. Had Edgar refused to listen, our story may have ended there. But, determined to be a good partner for Gertrude, Cayce did exactly as was suggested. It sounds a bit like Aunt Carrie was trying to get rid of Edgar. What do you think?
I don't know. I think she was over worried about appearing good enough for the Salter family.
I think that's the case. Like, you can't just be a store clerk.
Also, you can't live at home. You have to make enough money to be able to buy a property for you and your family. So I kind of understand where she's coming from, but it's very like, he has a stable job, he's making money. Like, I get it, but you can't disappoint your new bride from a richer family. That's just going to look bad on the entire family.
I think you're probably right. So with his experience at the Hopper bookstore, Edgar knew there was an enormous wholesale book distribution company with an equally enormous catalog of products stationed in Louisville, Kentucky, the largest city in the state. Edgar submitted his application, but sadly, he only received a cordial letter back stating that they'd put his resume on file for when a position opened. Determined, Edgar submitted glowing recommendations from everyone he could get to write him a recommendation letter. Eventually, the John P. Morton Company sent him a letter telling him to cease sending so many recommendations and show up for work Monday morning.
Nice.
In his memoirs, he says,
That was only 2 days away, and it came somewhat as a shock. I had to borrow money for my train ticket to get the job, but the hardest thing was telling Gertrude goodbye.
Louisville was 9 hours away by train, which cost $2.60 each way, and because they weren't married yet, visiting was considered a faux pas. It was like inappropriate. This would go about as well for the young couple as you'd imagine.
Casey's life is like this. There's moments where he's got good times and then moments where he's got really bad times, and it just keeps going back and forth, back and forth.
Some of it sounds like a great time, and then other times you're like, oh, I'm happy that's not me. When Edgar arrived in Louisville, it was as alien as it was metropolitan, with cobblestone streets, big crowds, and tall buildings. Like today, everything was nearly double the cost in the city, and Edgar was aghast to discover that room and board on 2nd Street would cost him $5 a month. Worse still, he had to pay it in advance. The first Christian church in Louisville was enormous too, and because the big preacher in town had originally come from Hopkinsville, the two hit it right off. Cayce would quickly become entrenched, and through the church would meet all the bigwigs in town. You know, I've long heard it rumored that if you want to join the Illuminati for realsies, the best way is to become hyper involved in charity and church organizations, which is what Cayce is doing. And it kind of works out for him.
You know, I like how you nonchalantly just called Freemasons bureaucrats. It's great.
I mean, that's what they do. Like, we'll take your money and we'll give it to the poor people.
Hey, society needs bureaucrats, all right? It's an honest work. Charity, come on, that's great. Just that's bureaucracy.
When Cayce arrived at the J.P. Morton Company bookstore, the staff was excited to meet the weirdo who came so highly recommended. First, the owner seemed suspicious. They thought, if you're so well liked, why did you choose to come start a new life here? Edgar proceeded to wow everybody by reciting the entire fall catalog from memory. So it turns out this was the right move. They gave him $1.50 a week raise right there on the spot. Now it's to supplement his $5 a month he was going to get already. As we know, that all would have gone to room and board, so he wasn't making nothing. In fact, he'd have to work a lot of side jobs just to get by. But one day, his luck would change. Mr. Griswold, the store manager, had put Edgar on the showroom floor when a woman named Margaret walked in. The two hit it off immediately, and Edgar sold her hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise. Griswold was stoked. He informed Edgar that this Margaret client of his was the wealthiest girl in the city, and until then, the company had been unsuccessful in their attempts to do business with her family. And just like that, Edgar found himself, along with the manager, on the receiving end of a dinner invitation to Margaret's house that very evening. You very much impressed the wealthiest girl in the city. You had better watch out, young man. Having nothing to wear, Cayce almost decided against going, but Griswold insisted, so he had a suit tailored for him that day and doubled his salary on the spot. Edgar's like, I don't know, I don't have any clothes. Griswold's like, no, you must go, my boy. I'll buy you a suit. You must go. You don't have a choice. This girl loves you. You must make her love you. We have money to make, my boy. At dinner, Margaret and Edgar got along even better. Margaret was involved in the Louisville branch of the Christian outreach program Edgar had been a part of in Hopkinsville. Edgar also learned that Margaret's father had struck it big farming dark tobacco, and the two nerded out famously over it. A few weeks later, Margaret's father paid a major renovation expansion for the bookstore. Edgar was summarily given an office and a salary of $40 a month. Edgar really is the real-life Forrest Gump. Sadly, though, this arrangement proved disastrous for Gertrude back home. As Edgar spent more and more time with Margaret, the letters back home to Gertrude ever dwindled. Suspecting something was amiss, undoubtedly tired of the long distance, Gertrude dropped from college and took to her bed as if in mourning. Meanwhile, Edgar and Margaret were spending every Sunday together, visiting hospitals and jails, doing outreach work. They also attended things like heavyweight boxing matches, Salvation Army meetings, and a vaudeville show. In one case, all on the same night. Edgar, after all, had been invited to the vaudeville show by a hypnotist, Herman the Great, who he had encountered at the bookstore. I happened to wait on him, not knowing who he was. When he went to pay for the cards, he appeared to take the money from my pocket. Then, with Griswold's permission, Herman the Great succeeded where Hart, the Laugh King, had failed, and hypnotized Edgar right there on the showroom floor, where he proved to be an exceptionally obedient subject. And while this instance would become largely forgotten, Edgar's hypnotic obedience proved to be an important trend. Another instance occurred just the following year, when Edgar was on a business trip with Leslie. Leslie had become a traveling insurance agent with a successful company. Along the way, the hotel they were staying at became officially quarantined due to an outbreak of smallpox. With a hypnotist in the midst, the guests did their best to entertain themselves for a duration of 3 days. Somewhere along the way, the hypnotist took Cayce as a subject and induced him to play piano while in trance. Usually when this happens, the hypnotic subject, unless they're already a trained pianist, will usually bang at the keys and at best play discordantly. But to the amazement of everyone, Edgar seemed to be able to play with the skill of a trained musician. Things, however, had come to a crisis point with Gertrude in the engagement. When Edgar came back for Christmas in 1899, his arms were full of beautifully wrapped presents from Margaret and her family. Meanwhile, Gertrude was pale, weak. She looked nearly emaciated. She could hardly keep the engagement ring on her finger, in fact, to prevent what seemed like the inevitable. Both the Cayces and the Salters interceded on the couple's behalf. Leslie offered a spot as his partner in his traveling insurance salesman gig. Edgar would accept, and despite traveling to shore up some business in Louisville, he never saw Margaret ever again.
I mean, good.
Yeah, it says in his memoirs he had like a secret flame, and he kind of makes it sound like the bookstore was kind of pushing him to marry Margaret because they wanted his family's business so badly.
Well, also cheated actions. Like there was a lot of things going on and his skills were being utilized in meaningful, I mean, albeit frivolous ways. But, you know, at the same time, how long could he keep that up until he would burn out completely and it would impact his health? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, they could have just gone off and done their church thing together for the rest of their lives. I think that's what it would have been.
Yeah, but I feel like she had a habit of showing him off in a way that was slightly exploitative.
So Edgar got away from Louisville and he just went to work with his dad. And for a while, Edgar did a pretty good job on the road selling insurance. Alongside his side hustle of selling items from the J.P. Morton catalog, he was pulling down $50 a month, the equivalent of $5,000 today. With Cayce's special talents and earnest charm, Leslie was making sales left and right, but all was not well. Cayce was suffering from head-splitting migraines. Doctors would later discover that scar tissue from his childhood injury to his testicles was ultimately to blame, but it would be another 14 years before the biological basis was discovered. For now, Edgar was convinced he just had a case of bad karma. He was, after all, racked with guilt for having betrayed Gertrude's trust, and he felt like he had failed the advice of his angel in childhood. Was he really being true to himself? Could he really claim to be using his gifts in the service of God? For the time being, he felt like he had been using his gifts in the service of his father Leslie, whose politics and worldview he'd begun to ardently disagree with. This, alongside a few other caveats, made the gig totally unbearable. For starters, it meant traveling by train non-stop during the coldest part of the year. It also meant using his charm and psychic intuition to anticipate how best to make a sale with customers. While this seemed innocuous enough because life insurance, after all, can be a real godsend for a family, the catch was that with Woodman of America, it only sold insurance to white people, and that's the way Leslie liked it. Leslie, after all, was an avowed racist, and was outspoken that black folks who stepped out of line deserved little more than lynching behind the old Hopkinsville jail. Naturally, this was cause for some tension between the pair, as Edgar did not share in his dad's sentiment. Edgar, after all, was well aware that he owed his very life to at least 2 freed slaves, and it was another one who had imparted upon him his intense love of the Bible. The intellectual backdrop of The Hill likely only bolstered Edgar's convictions on this point. Now, this is where our story really takes off. In terms of our larger discussion about the New Age, or Aeon, as Aleister Crowley would refer to it, and of course what role Cayce would play in the whole thing, I think it's interesting that Cayce's initiation onto the path where he'll use his psychic gifts, the time when this part will truly begin, it all starts on April 18th, 1900. April 18th can be read 418, which also just so happens to be the numerical value of the magical formula abrahadabra, the supposed word of the Aeon, according to Thelema. Isn't that interesting? Like, if you're me and you're looking for clues that Edgar Cayce may be a prophet of the New Age, 418 is the perfect number to look for, and that's when the whole thing really gets started.
It is documented on that day, 418, so that's kind of cool about it all. It's a fact of the whole thing.
It feels like one of these all of a sudden twists of fate type things, because he's traveling through Elkton. He's only 20 miles from Hopkinsville, and he suddenly gets this head-splitting migraine. He decides to stop into a local doctor's office to get a dose of sedative. The doctors give Edgar a mysterious white powder. They tell him to dissolve it in water and drink it before he goes to bed. So Edgar goes back to his hotel, and he does exactly what he was told. Except when he wakes up, he's back in Hopkinsville, and 2 doctors are looming over him. They seemed relieved. According to witnesses, Edgar had been found wandering around, acting very strangely at the Elkton train station. Quite similarly, in fact, to how he had been acting to that one time in childhood when he got the baseball to the spine and began acting all possessed. There was just one problem now. When Edgar woke up, he couldn't talk. Unable to produce more than a painful whisper, the doctors merely assumed it's just a temporary case of laryngitis. They expected it to clear up in a matter of days, but it didn't. Teas didn't work, medicine didn't work. By the third month, Edgar was convinced he would never speak normally again. The best he could muster was a hoarse whisper, and the pain doing so was nearly unbearable. In this state, Edgar certainly couldn't go back to work for JP Morgan in the same capacity he had before, and he also couldn't sell insurance with Dad, who was working harder than ever and failing miserably without his help. So, you want to buy some life insurance? No, sir. Well, you should buy some life insurance, you idiot! You're going to die someday! Now you buy some life insurance? Edgar felt like his life was ruined. His Hopkinsville family, with Leslie as the sole breadwinner, now had to move into a small rental, which Gary then turned into a boarding house. Even Edgar's younger sisters had to drop out of school and get a job making hats. Now, at this point in the journey, overcome by self-loathing, Edgar asked Gertrude to release him from his engagement. Gertrude, however, was not willing to give up. Edgar's just like, I'm such a loser, man. You don't want to marry a loser, Gertrude. My sisters make hats.
She's like, don't be silly. I'll wear the hats.
Look at this picture in the notes. She's got a huge hat.
I know.
It's probably it's a Cayce hat, no doubt.
So huge that it moved during the photo, so it's all blurry.
It's just ectoplasm. Ectoplasm resting gently upon her girl fro. She does look disappointed in this picture. A little, off-put. And Edgar looks like he's a fish.
I like how she's higher up than him as well. He looks like her child. So, again, with the spiritual symbolism here, it's like mother and child, husband and wife, it's all of the relationships in two people.
Edgar looks like his suit is made of metal and he's thinking about eating boogers.
And he's got those elephant ears.
That's for lift. Fortunately, Edgar had a good reputation for himself in town, and a friend of the Hopper brothers, William R. Bowles, swooped in to make a temporary rescue. Bowles offered Edgar an apprenticeship in the photo studio upstairs from the Coleman shoe store, and he gratefully accepted. Although Edgar didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of his normal day job career.
It's kind of cool that he picked that job, because this was at the time when having your portrait taken was like a big deal, and everybody wanted one because it was like the new technology around. And obviously this meant that it was also a very profitable business to get ahead of at the time.
It was also less expensive than commissioning a painting portrait.
Yeah, that's like next level badassery.
So this is like AI back then.
It really was. And they talked about it in the same way we talk about AI today. Like, it's gonna take our soul. It's gonna destroy art. It's gonna ruin our skill.
Oh yeah, Amish people still, there's a lot of old Amish that do not want their pictures taken or video because they believe it sucks your soul out of your body.
There's probably a little bit of truth to it. Let's be real. I mean, I love photography. That's my favorite. If you just, Luke, you have to go be an artist now. What do you choose? I'd be like, oh, I don't know, photographer. But there's probably some truth to all that.
No, it's a very nerdy thing to get into. My photography friends have always told me it's like you're painting with light. And if you know a little bit about photography, it's absolutely true. And the way you can mess with the settings and stuff. The technology was just emerging, and his brain is pretty crazy because, he's psychic and shit. And
yeah,
he's taking photos of people.
But what is photos but an imprintation of electromagnetic energy that is reflected off of the physical body of another being? So it kind of makes sense, the spiritual side, and also the fact that Edgar was so good at this, because a lot of his readings, I'd reckon, are just a reading of this energy reflecting off of other people's psyches. Just like a photograph is just a frozen moment in time of light reflecting off of people.
Yeah, and he was smart enough to know that, and he was pretty damn good at his job.
He was actually damn good as a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, though, he's making a lot of frames. He's staying in the back because he's got no voice. And it's by now. Everybody's heard about it. Everybody knows Cayce has lost his voice. And numerous people have also told Edgar Cayce to seek out the help of Stanley Hart, the traveling stage hypnotist Cayce had met prior and who had unsuccessfully put him into a trance. Nonetheless, Hart was confident that he could not only put Cayce into a trance on stage, but affect the healing of his voice too. After all, if Cayce had successfully gone into a trance for others, Stanley was pretty sure that he could reproduce it. According to the prevailing wisdom at the time, it was easier to put someone in a trance once they had already done it once before. So as expected, Stanley had Cayce come up on stage, and he quickly did put him into a trance. Then miraculously, when Stanley commanded Edgar to speak, his voice was loud and normal. The audience gasped. They broke into a cheer. Stanley had done it. He had cured Edgar's voice with hypnotism. There was just one problem, though. When Cayce was commanded to awaken, his voice was back to a whisper. Backstage after the show, Stanley assured Edgar that he could effect a permanent cure, but it would cost him $200 and the willingness to let Hart give it a few more tries. Sadly, these later attempts, attended by a throat specialist, no less, they saw the same results. When Cayce was under it, he would speak normally, but once he woke up, no dice. his voice was still gone. Unsuccessful and frustrated, Hart gave up for the time being and left Hopkinsville to resume his traveling performance show. Cayce and Gertrude, however, did not give up. In fact, they put Edgar under the care of a Dr. Giroux, a former professor of both German and psychology at South Kentucky College. Giroux had seen what had happened on stage, and he sort of became obsessed with hypnotism after that. Giroux also made it his own personal mission to figure out what was going on with Cayce. The problem was, though, that when Dr. Giroux went and did these hypnosis sessions, he insisted on doing them in a funeral home display window for everyone to gawk at. Gertrude saw this as an obvious publicity stunt and was none too impressed. At the behest of Cayce's family, Dr. Giroux eventually was induced to contact a specialist in the field from New York, a Dr. John D. Quackenboss.
Such a great name.
Epic.
I love how there's a John D. in the story as well. He ends up being a critical piece of figuring out how the whole trance readings thing will work. Quackenboss, like Hart and Giroux, was ultimately unable to effect more than a temporary cure for Edgar's whisper, and he left Hopkinsville frustrated as well. But before he left, Quackenboss had proven, at least to himself, that Edgar was about as ideal of a subject as you could possibly have for hypnosis. He once ordered Edgar to sleep 24 hours, and Edgar did exactly that, to the minute. After Quackenboss left, Al Lane was brought in because he was the only one in Hopkinsville with any training. He was also Edgar Cayce's sister's boss, who owned the hat store. So he's the hat man.
Yeah, and he got the, do you want to make more money? Of course, we all do. Online accredited degree for like basically what was chiropractic before.
Did you know that I'm a doctor? I also have a hat store. Would you like a hat?
Fucked up skull because I tapped on it too hard.
It's called cranial sacral therapy, you see. Now, Lane, he was a skinny dude in his late 30s. He, in fact, suffered from chronic malnutrition. Of all the silly men to get involved, Lane was helpful in that he viewed hypnotism as not just something to show off to people with all the theatrics. He saw it as just one part of a patient's medical treatment. Now, he also billed himself dubiously as a doctor. As Mari pointed out, Lane had learned osteopathy from a mail order course. What's osteopathy? It's similar to chiropractic adjustment, except the overarching philosophy is that, like, if you adjust the bones and the muscles correctly, the body will heal itself. It's now largely considered pseudoscience, but pretty much anything that doesn't make drug manufacturers money usually is. And as I was joking, if you've ever heard of cranial sacral therapy, that's one of the treatments. And I thought everyone on the show might enjoy how passive-aggressively the Wikipedia summary is written.
Cranial sacral therapy, CST, or cranial osteopathy, is a form of alternative medicine that uses gentle touch to feel non-existent rhythmic movements of the skull's bones and supposedly adjust the immovable joints of the skull to achieve a therapeutic result.
It actually says that. Non-existent.
Non-existent. Supposedly. Immovable joints. Bruh.
Yeah, it's almost like, you stupid idiots. Might as well just say that afterwards.
This should just say, actually.
I think it's worth mentioning because these sorts of treatments that we now consider pseudoscience, they were just blossoming everywhere. And in fact, some of the treatments that Edgar would give later in his trance readings were osteopathic treatments. Like, I get it. I could see how in certain circumstances you could consider stuff like this just total pseudoscience. But if you go out and you say chiropractic is total nonsense, it's total pseudoscience, like, that's a bridge too far for me. And that's what the Wikipedia says. Sometimes you need your back pop.
I mean, this also kind of reminds me of the miracle treatment. Have you guys heard of that? Where it's like you drink slightly bleached water or something and it kills parasites in your digestive tract.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do that, by the way. Don't do that.
Don't. But like I'm saying, there's still, like, even today in the New Age movement, there's a lot of snake oil stuff going on.
Yes.
So that was even going on back then, which, I mean, it gets cracked down on quite a bit eventually. But it's like, what are we to say that these treatments don't work? Like, we don't really research them. We just either crack down on them or allow it to happen.
This is when homeopathy is becoming a school of medicine, essentially.
Yeah.
So an example of homeopathic medicine suggestion may be you have a runny nose, you want the runny nose to stop, so you take a little bit of something that actually gives you runny nose, let's say hot peppers.
Yeah.
So take some hot pepper extract, and then your body is supposed to respond to that little bit of stimulation by stopping the runny nose.
Yeah, but it's also like people talk about Chinese medicine or folk remedies. This is also falls under a lot of these homeopathic treatments. Is even then they were discovering recipes that had long been known from like tribal peoples or even really, really old school settlers that had been forgotten over time. So there was a revival of this kind of nature and natural plant-based medicine that was blooming at the time.
And you know, I actually believe in this stuff to some extent. I think all of these angles are good to explore. I'm not so quick to call everything pseudoscience, but at this time, it's not pseudoscience, it's cutting edge science.
Yeah.
That's what's cool about this era. Was truly the American dream. You could
There was freedom
dream.
to explore, yeah.
This guy literally, he dreamed his way to the top.
Let's be real. You make how much in 2 weeks? Let's say you make $1,000 in 2 weeks. You're so entry level, you get paid nothing. And let's say you memorize your entire catalog of vitamins or wherever you work. There is no way in a year you're gonna be pulling down like $100,000, right? It's never gonna happen. Like he went from $5 to $40 in a month. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's not gonna happen. I'm sorry. You could just make it big doing something dumb back then. Tesla was even like, Edison doesn't even know what he's doing. He just puts random things together over and over and over until something works. Anyway, so Lane and Giroux would undergo many experiments with Edgar, but Lane's most important discovery was that Edgar was not only capable of speaking in trance, but he could carry on long and lucid conversations. For Gertrude, however, Giroux's insistence on doing these experiments in the window of a funeral parlor just too much like turning her husband into a sideshow freak, and the experiments were largely put on hold. But Edgar's weight dropped to 85 pounds, and his family was becoming desperate. Meanwhile, during a conversation with Al Lane, John D. Quackenboss had an all-important idea, the eureka moment of our story, noting that Edgar's unconscious self seemed to take charge during trance, and that further, he was capable of holding long, cogent conversations. The operating hypnotist ought to ask the unconscious Cayce how to best heal and restore the waking Cayce's voice. It was brilliant, but at this point, Lane practically had to beg Gertrude to let him try it. She eventually agreed, and the gaggle of intrepid researchers arrived at the Cayce home Sunday afternoon, March 31st, 1901, to try the experiment. Edgar lay down on an antique horsehair sofa. From an occult perspective, I think this is important because horses correspond to spirit travel and transpossession, making it perfectly conductive to the working at hand. It also seems important to mention that by this time, Edgar was capable of putting himself into a trance, having done it so many times. Lane was simply needed to operate the procedure once he was under.
You are now asleep and will be able to tell us what we want to know. You have before you the body of Edgar Cayce. Describe his condition and tell us what is wrong.
At first, Edgar could only mumble, but shortly, his throat cleared, and he spoke the words, "Yes, we can see the body. In the normal physiological state," Edgar said, "the body is unable to speak due to partial paralysis of the inferior muscles of the vocal cords produced by nerve strain. This is a psychological condition producing the physical effect and may be removed by increasing the circulation to the affected parts by suggesting while in this unconscious condition. That is the only thing that will do it. Suggestion to the body forces the circulation through it here, and the circulation passes along and takes that away, puts new life to it, and makes the supply to the nerve force go, you see. Although it's a well-loved trope in New Age circles today, Lane was curious why Edgar should be addressing himself in the third person and possessed of what seemed to be an agreeable yet somewhat alien personality. Lane then offered the command,
"Increase circulation to the affected parts."
Edgar replied like a helpful computer on a science fiction spaceship. Circulation to the affected parts is increasing. Leslie leaned over to see what was happening. Edgar's throat area actually appeared to be swelling and turning darker shades of red. So much that Leslie unbuttoned his shirt a little bit. This went on for about 20 minutes until Edgar suddenly cleared his throat and spoke, still in trance. "It's all right now. The condition is removed. The vocal cords are perfectly normal now. Make the suggestion that the circulation return to normal and that after the body will awaken." Lane did precisely as he was instructed. Edgar's neck began to return to its normal size and color. After a few minutes, Edgar sat up, reached for his handkerchief, and began to cough up a significant amount of blood. "Hello." Edgar's voice was crystal clear. He smiled largely. "Hey, I can talk." It was like in soccer when you score a goal, or when Luke Skywalker blows up the Death Star. His mom was crying, his dad grabbed Lane, started shaking and repeating over and over.
Good boy, good boy.
His sisters watching through the keyhole were like, woo! And so the precedent was set. Edgar Cayce healed himself while in a hypnotic trance. All they had to do was give the guy the correct hypnotic suggestion. What seemed to be the crazy part is that it was like a feedback loop, because they asked Cayce what to do, and then they told Cayce what Cayce told them what to do. Does that make sense? At this point, Casey's basically their magical computer. And so it's from this, things start to get really crazy. But if you'd like to hear about this early stage and Edgar Cayce's psychic readings and all of the absolutely mind-blowing and well-documented instances of his psychic behavior, how he used it to heal the sick and also maybe for just a little bit of fun and profit, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you this extended episode, but all of our extended episodes that go back over 5 years. I'll send you a 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art. I've got him fresh off the press. You'll get the secret keys to our Discord server, where you can talk to us about that one time you used your psychic powers to light yourself on fire when you were sleeping. Because I know there's some of you out there that have psychic powers, and I want you to tell us about the time that you got pissed off and made your phone stop working, because I know you're out there. I believe you. I believe your stories. So come tell us the stories. And come back next week for part 3. God forbid, maybe a part 4. We'll see. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers. I gotta get a pew pew pew.
Pew pew. Sorry, I had to.
Pew pew pew.